My fingertips grazed the cold ivory of the Steinway just as his mistress shoved me aside. "Don't touch his piano," she hissed, her voice cutting through the chatter of Manhattan's elite. They thought I was just the discarded wife crashing their six-star gala. They didn't know this instrument wasn't for entertainment. The song I was about to play was the activation code that would bring my husband's billion-dollar empire crashing to the ground. My name is Eleanor Vance, and at 34 years old, I had become invisible. I stood in the corner of the Diamond Ballroom at the Pierre Hotel, a glass of lukewarm, sparkling water in my hand, watching the world I built spin around a man who no longer wanted me. The room was a suffocating kaleidoscope of black tuxedos and designer gowns, the air thick with the scent of expensive champagne and ambition. This was the launch gala for Nexacorp's latest artificial intelligence, the night that was supposed to change the tech world forever. To everyone here, the heavy hitters of Wall Street, the tech journalists hungry for a scoop, the venture capitalists looking for their next unicorn, this was Adrian's night. I watched him from across the room. Adrian, my husband, the CEO. He looked devastatingly handsome in his midnight blue velvet dinner jacket, holding court in the center of the room like a king. He threw his head back and laughed at something a potential investor said, that charismatic, magnetic laugh that had once made me fall in love with him in a cramped coffee shop 12 years ago. He was basking in the glow of the flashing cameras, soaking up the adoration, every inch the visionary genius they believed him to be. They had no idea that the revolutionary code he was about to present, the algorithms that made the AI indistinguishable from human consciousness, were written by me. They were written in the quiet hours of the morning while Adrian slept, sacrificed for by a woman who had traded her concert pianist dreams for his corporate ladder. Then, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The crowd parted, not with respect, but with a mixture of awe and gossip-fueled curiosity. Tiffany had arrived. She was an Instagram model with 3 million followers and an attitude to match. She swept into the room wearing a scarlet dress that clung to her body like a second skin, a violent splash of color in a sea of monochrome. She walked straight to Adrian, sliding her arm through his as if she owned him, as if she were the hostess of this event. Adrian didn't pull away. He leaned down and whispered something in her ear that made her giggle, a sound that grated against my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. I felt the temperature around me drop. People I had known for a decade, friends who had attended our wedding and come to our backyard barbecues, suddenly found the intricate patterns of the carpet fascinating. They averted their eyes. I was the old wife, the relic, the awkward baggage that was about to be left at the terminal while Adrian boarded the private jet to his new life. I felt a profound, aching isolation, a coldness that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. My eyes sought out the one thing in the room that still made sense to me. Center stage, bathed in a solitary spotlight, sat a vintage Steinway grand piano. It was magnificent, its black lacquer gleaming like dark water. To the audience, it was just a prop for the entertainment segment. To me, it was a symbol of everything I had given up. But more than that, it was the heart of tonight's system. I had rigged the entire demonstration to interface through that instrument. Without thinking, drawn by a force I couldn't control, I began to walk toward it. I needed to feel the wood under my fingertips. I needed to know that something real still existed in this room of plastic smiles and hollow promises. I navigated through the crowd, a ghost passing through the living, until I reached the edge of the low stage. My hand reached out, trembling slightly, longing to brush against the keys that used to be my entire world. Suddenly, a hand struck my wrist. Hard. I recoiled, looking up into the perfectly made-up, sneering face of Tiffany. She had moved with the speed of a viper. "Don't touch his piano," she hissed, her voice sharp and loud enough to slice through the ambient chatter. Heads turned. "Adrian doesn't want you dirtying his stage. You are embarrassing him." My breath hitched. I looked past her shoulder to Adrian. He had stopped talking. He was looking right at me. For a split second, I hoped he would step in, that he would remember the years of struggle, the late nights, the love. But his eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth. He didn't look at me like a wife. He looked at me like a glitch in the software, with a curl of his lip that expressed nothing but contempt. He raised a hand and signaled to the security team waiting in the shadows. He wasn't coming to save me. He was throwing me out. Ladies and gentlemen, please, a moment of silence. Adrian's voice boomed through the microphone, drowning out my protests. He stepped between me and the piano, his face a mask of faux concern that chilled me to the bone. I must apologize for this disruption. My wife, Eleanor, has been struggling with significant mental health instability recently. She is not herself, and she should not be here to mar this historic occasion. The gasp from the audience was audible. I stood frozen, the blood draining from my face. He was painting me as insane to discredit me before I could even open my mouth. Adrian turned to Tiffany, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her into the spotlight. "It is time we focus on the future," he declared, his voice dripping with charisma. "This is Tiffany. She is the true muse behind Project Ether. Her vitality, her modern vision, and her spirit were the inspiration that drove this AI to completion. She is the face of the new Nexacorp." "Inspiration," I choked out, my voice trembling with rage. I tried to step around him to address the crowd. "I wrote the core kernel. I spent 10 years building the neural networks while you were out partying. That is my code in those servers." Adrian laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that echoed off the high ceilings. He looked down at me with pure disgust. "You look at yourself, Eleanor. You are a frumpy housewife who has not touched a computer in years. Do not embarrass yourself by pretending you understand the complexities of my company. You are useless, Eleanor. You have been useless for a long time." Before I could respond, heavy hands clamped onto my arms. 2 men in dark suits from Blackguard, the private security firm Adrian had hired without my knowledge, were suddenly on either side of me. They did not ask me to leave. They grabbed me with bruising force, ready to drag me out like a common trespasser. The room erupted in titters and whispers. Smartphones were raised like 1,000 judging eyes. I saw the red recording dots. They were live streaming this. The wealthy elite of New York were broadcasting the destruction of my dignity to the world, laughing as the discarded first wife was hauled away to make room for the younger, shinier model. My heart hammered against my ribs, but panic only truly set in when I thought of Ben. I frantically scanned the periphery of the ballroom until I spotted the oversized velvet chair in the far corner. My 7-year-old son was there, watched by his nanny. Thank God. He was wearing his noise-canceling gaming headphones, eyes glued to a tablet screen. He was oblivious. He did not see his father destroying his mother. That realization snapped something inside me. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. If Ben was safe, I had nothing left to lose. I stopped struggling against the guards. My posture straightened. The tears that had gathered in my eyes receded, leaving my vision crystal clear. I yanked my arm away from the guard on my left with a sharp, violent motion that caught him off guard. He stepped back, surprised. I took a breath, smoothed the fabric of my dress, and looked Adrian dead in the eye. "You want me to leave?" I asked, my voice devoid of the hysteria he had promised the crowd. It was flat, calm, and terrifyingly composed. "Fine, I will go. But you owe me this much. Adrian, let me play one final song to congratulate you. Let me say goodbye to the company I helped build in the only way I know how." The room went silent, waiting for his reaction. Adrian looked at me, searching for a trap, but all he saw was a defeated woman clinging to a shred of artistic vanity. He smirked, seeing a chance to showcase his magnanimity to the investors. "Very well," he said, gesturing grandly to the Steinway. "If playing a little tune will help you salvage some dignity, go ahead. I can be generous. Play your song, Eleanor, and then get out of my sight." As I settled onto the bench, the blinding lights of the gala seemed to dissolve into the dim, amber glow of a street lamp outside a basement window in Brooklyn. My mind drifted back 12 years. Back then, I was not the invisible wife or the unstable woman being pitied by strangers. I was Eleanor the prodigy, a star student at Juilliard with a scholarship that promised a concert tour across Europe. Adrian was just a boy with holes in his sneakers and a head full of impossible ideas. He had the vision, but he lacked the means. I had the talent, but I loved him more than I loved the applause. I remembered the day I walked into the bank and withdrew the entire inheritance my grandmother had left me. It was $50,000, a fortune to us at the time. It was meant to buy a Steinway of my own. Instead, it bought servers, cloud storage, and a business license for a startup called Nexacorp. I gave up the scholarship. I gave up the tour. I bet everything on him. Those nights in that cramped apartment were a blur of exhaustion and adrenaline. By day, I taught piano to disinterested children to pay our rent and keep the lights on. By night, while Adrian collapsed from fatigue, I sat by the window, teaching myself to code. I devoured textbooks on machine learning and neural networks, translating the complex logic of music theory into the logic of algorithms. The code that ran Nexacorp was not just math, it was a composition, intricate and balanced, written by a musician's hand. I could still hear his voice from his 24th birthday. "We could only afford a single cupcake and a cheap bottle of wine." He looked at me across our wobbly kitchen table, his eyes shining with tears, and swore an oath. He said that my sacrifice would never be forgotten. He told me that his success was actually my symphony, just played on a different stage. I believed him. I drank every drop of that lie. But as the company began to gain traction, the narrative shifted. Adrian came home one evening, flushing with excitement but avoiding my eyes. He told me that the venture capitalists were old-fashioned. He claimed they wanted a CEO who looked like a titan of industry, unburdened by a co-founder title shared with his wife. They preferred the image of a bachelor or a man with a devoted housewife keeping the home fires burning. He asked me to step into the shadows for the good of the company. "Just for a little while," he said. So I did. I gave birth to our son, Ben, and I buried Eleanor the pianist and Eleanor the coder. I became Eleanor the mother, the silent partner who proofread his speeches and fixed the critical bugs in the system from a laptop in the nursery while he took the credit in Silicon Valley boardrooms. The change happened slowly. Then, all at once, right after the company went public on the stock market. The money did not bring us closer. It built a wall of ice between us. There were sudden business trips to Paris and Milan that did not appear on his official calendar. He came home smelling of perfume that was floral and sharp, nothing like the vanilla scent I wore. When I asked him about his day, he would snap at me, calling me nagging and ungrateful. I told myself it was just the pressure of running a billion-dollar empire. I told myself he was stressed. I was a fool who wanted to believe in the fairy tale, right up until the moment I found the evidence that shattered my world. It started 6 months ago on a rainy Tuesday. I was searching for a tax document in Adrian's home office when I found a burner phone taped beneath his desk drawer. Curiosity turned to horror as I unlocked it, for his passcode was still his birthday, a testament to the arrogance of a man who thought he was untouchable. It was not just the texts to Tiffany, though those were vile enough. It was the banking notifications. He was funneling money out of Nexacorp, tens of millions of dollars at a time, washing it through shell companies in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Then came the phone call I overheard a week later. I was bringing him tea, playing the dutiful wife, when I paused outside the heavy oak doors. He was speaking to his personal lawyer on speakerphone. I heard him say clearly that he wanted the divorce papers served the day after the gala. He laughed and said I would get nothing, that he had structured the assets so I would be left on the street while he and Tiffany enjoyed the fortune built on my back. He called it a strategic restructuring of his personal life, but the betrayal went deeper than money or infidelity. I dug into the company archives late one night and found the transfer deeds. He had legally reassigned the intellectual property of my core algorithms, my life's work, to his personal holding company and, sickeningly, to Tiffany. They had erased my name from history before I was even gone. The final blow, the one that turned my sadness into cold, hard resolve, was the encrypted file I found regarding the user data. Adrian was not just greedy, he was dangerous. He was in final negotiations to sell the personal data of 150 million American users to a foreign conglomerate known for cyber espionage. He was trading national security for a payout of $500 million. He did not care about the users, the country, or the world our son Ben would grow up in. He was willing to sell everyone out for a golden parachute. I wanted to burst into the room and scream at him. I wanted to smash his computer and call the police right then, but I stopped myself. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman with no bank account of her own, no lawyers, and no credibility. If I fought him then, he would crush me. He would use his high-priced legal team to take Ben away from me. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the ghost he already thought I was. So, I put on a mask. For 6 months. I played the part of the submissive, oblivious wife. I let him insult me. I let him think I was weak and distracted. But every night, after he went to sleep or left to be with Tiffany, I went to work. I dusted off my coding skills, fighting through the rust until my fingers remembered the language of the machine. I did not try to hack the front gate, as that would have triggered alarms. Instead, I went looking for the back door I had installed in the very first version of the software, a failsafe I had written 10 years ago just in case we ever got locked out. It was still there, buried under layers of updates, deep in the kernel, waiting for its master. I realized then that I did not need a lawyer to fight him. I just needed access. I prepared myself to dismantle him, line of code by line of code. I needed an ally. Someone who understood both the beauty of a concerto and the brutal logic of a decryption key. I turned to Marcus, my old piano professor from Juilliard, to the outside world. Marcus was just an eccentric, retired musician with a penchant for expensive scotch and vintage vinyl. But I knew the truth. Before he taught music, he was a pioneer in cryptography for the government and a silent investor who held significant sway in the tech sector. When I sat in his dimly lit study and laid out the evidence, the spreadsheets of laundered money, the transcripts of the illegal data sale, and the photos of Adrian and Tiffany Marcus did not look shocked. He looked furious. He slammed his hand down on his mahogany desk, his face red with a protective rage. He told me that Adrian was not just a thief, but a fool for underestimating the woman who built his throne. He agreed immediately to cover my legal fees and protect my assets, effectively becoming my silent war chest. Together, we devised the Requiem. It was not just a plan, it was a masterpiece of digital warfare. I spent 3 months writing the code, working in short, intense bursts while Adrian was asleep or out with his mistress. The payload was a sophisticated virus, but unlike the malicious software used by hackers to destroy or ransom data, this was designed to shine a light. I managed to slip it into the update package for the hotel's audio-visual system 48 hours before the gala. It was disguised as a routine driver patch for the surround sound synchronization, something the venue technicians installed without a second thought. The virus was dormant, lurking in the background of the hotel's server, waiting for a specific trigger. It was an audio-gapped activation protocol. The system was listening, analyzing every sound wave in the ballroom, waiting for a precise sequence of notes, a specific tempo, and a unique dynamic range. It was a musical password that only I could enter. Once the AI recognized the melody, It would execute a command to override the presentation screens and the live broadcast feed. It would not delete a single byte of company data. Instead, it would pull everything from the shadow servers, the offshore accounts, the illicit contracts with the foreign conglomerate, the emails mocking the investors, and display it on the massive 8K screen behind the stage, while simultaneously emailing the entire packet to the FBI Cybercrime Division. While I was coding this digital execution, I was also securing my physical escape. I knew that once the truth came out, Adrian would be cornered and dangerous. I made 3 hard copies of every incriminating document and stored them in safety deposit boxes across the city under Marcus's name. I met with a ruthless divorce attorney recommended by Marcus, drafting a petition for full sole custody of Ben based on Adrian's criminal activities and endangerment of our family. I had to ensure that when the empire fell, the debris would not hit my son. By the morning of the gala, I was no longer the victim. I was a loaded weapon, and the piano was my trigger. All I needed was one song to end it all. The velvet bench groaned slightly under my weight as I sat down, a singular point of stillness in a room vibrating with mockery. I could feel the heat of 1,000 gazes burning into my back, the lenses of the cameras zooming in to capture the high-definition tears of the discarded wife. To my right, Adrian leaned in close to Tiffany, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered something that made her cover her mouth to stifle a cruel giggle. They looked at me with the pity one might reserve for a wounded animal that refuses to die with dignity. They believed I was there to play a sentimental ballad, a pathetic attempt to remind Adrian of a love he had already sold for a higher stock price. They were so tragically wrong. I inhaled deeply, the air tasting of stale perfume and expensive ozone. I raised my hands, hovering them over the keys for a fraction of a second. The black and white ivory felt cold, smooth, and terrifiedly familiar. For the last decade, my hands had been shaped by dishwater and laundry, but in this moment, the muscle memory of the prodigy returned with a vengeance. This piano was not just an instrument of wood and wire, it was the keyboard to the most dangerous terminal I had ever logged into. It was my weapon, and the ammunition was sound. I struck the first chord. It was not the soft, melodic opening of a nocturne. It was a jarring, dissonant strike that rang out like a gunshot. The audience flinched. I launched immediately into the opening movement of the Requiem. It was a complex mathematical variation I had composed specifically for this system, a cascade of notes that moved with the frantic precision of binary code. It was fast, aggressive, and relentless. As my fingers flew across the octaves, the room began to change. The advanced surround sound system, which I had compromised 48 hours ago, recognized the audio fingerprint. It didn't just amplify the sound. It enveloped the room in it. The bass notes reverberated in the chests of the venture capitalists in the front row, while the treble notes seemed to slice through the air like glass shards. The atmosphere shifted from awkwardness to a heavy, suffocating awe. It became maudlin and electric all at once. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Adrian's posture stiffen. The arrogant smirk was slipping. He looked up at the massive LED screen behind me, the one displaying the Nexacorp logo. The lights were flickering, not randomly, but in perfect synchronization with the rhythm of my playing. Every time I hit a forte, the stage lights pulsed. It was subtle at first, a heartbeat in the electrical grid, but Adrian was a tech CEO. He knew machines. He knew that a piano shouldn't be controlling the lighting rig. A shadow of unease crossed his face, the first crack in his perfect armor. Tiffany, sensing the shift but not understanding the cause, stepped forward in her red dress, her face twisted in annoyance. She opened her mouth, likely to shout at me to stop this racket, but Adrian grabbed her wrist. He held her back, his eyes darting from me to the audience. He saw the investors leaning forward, captivated by the sheer violence and virtuosity of the performance. He realized that stopping me now, while the room was spellbound, would look weak. He was trapped by his own need for spectacle. I did not look at them. I poured everything into the music. 10 years of silence. 10 years of being the woman behind the man. 10 years of swallowed pride. It all came pouring out through my fingertips. I played faster, the tempo accelerating to a breakneck speed that defied human endurance. My forearms burned, but I felt a cold, euphoric clarity. I was driving the system toward the threshold, pushing the frequency higher and higher toward the activation key. I was not just playing a song, I was executing a command, and I was terrified and exhilarated by the destruction I was about to unleash. The crescendo was building, a tidal wave of sound rising up to swallow the lie that was Nexacorp. I brought my hands down with the crushing weight of finality, striking the last thunderous chord. It was a low A, a note so deep it seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. At the exact moment the hammer hit the string, the massive 80-foot LED wall behind me cut to black. The stage lights died instantly, plunging the ballroom into a sudden, disorienting gloom. For a single heartbeat, the silence was absolute. The music had stopped, but the echo of its violence hung in the air. I sat frozen, my hands still gripping the keys, breathing hard. In the quiet, I heard Adrian let out a short, derisive snort. He stepped forward, his silhouette visible against the dim emergency exit lights, and I saw his teeth flash in a smirk. He thought I had simply blown a fuse. He thought my emotional instability had overloaded the circuit breakers. He opened his mouth, likely to make a joke about my inability to handle high-voltage situations, but the words died in his throat. The screen behind me did not flicker back to the corporate logo. Instead, it exploded into life with a blinding intensity, bathed in a harsh, blood-red glow. Giant, bold letters seared themselves into the retinas of every guest in the room. The truth about Nexacorp. Before anyone could process the headline, the floodgates opened. My virus began to vomit the contents of Adrian's secret servers onto the screen in a rapid-fire montage. It was a deluge of digital skeletons. Bank statements from the Cayman Islands showing millions of dollars being siphoned out of the employee pension fund flashed by. Emails between Adrian and his lawyer detailing how to hide assets from me appeared in high definition. A grainy security video played on a loop in the corner, showing Adrian throwing a tablet at a junior developer and screaming threats that would make a sailor blush. Then came the sound. The speakers, which had just carried my symphony, now crackled with the static of a phone recording. It was Adrian's voice, unmistakable and crisp, amplified to a deafening volume. She wrote the code, TIFF, but who cares? His recorded voice sneered, the arrogance dripping from every syllable. Eleanor is the past. Once I sell the user database to the consortium in Shanghai for $500 million, we will be untouchable. Who cares about privacy laws by the time the feds figure it out? We will be on a yacht in the Mediterranean. The ballroom erupted. It wasn't applause this time. It was the sound of pure panic. The sophisticated veneer of the gala shattered instantly. I watched as venture capitalists, men and women who controlled billions of dollars, scrambled to their feet. They were not looking at the stage anymore. They were looking at their phones, screaming at their brokers. In the bottom right corner of the giant screen, my code had generated a real-time graphic of the Nexacorp stock price. It was a red line plummeting straight down, a free fall that represented billions of dollars of market cap evaporating in seconds. Adrian stood center stage, his face drained of all color, looking like a corpse in a tuxedo. He spun around, staring at the screen in horror, watching his confession play out on a loop. The charm was gone. The confidence was gone. He looked wild, feral. He sprinted toward the technical booth at the side of the stage, nearly tripping over the monitor cables. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking, desperation clawing at his throat. Cut the power. Shut it down. Shut it down right now. I watched from the piano bench, calm and unmoving, as the head technician frantically typed on his keyboard. He looked up at Adrian, his face pale with sweat, and shook his head helplessly. He pointed at his monitor. Adrian grabbed the technician by the collar, shoving him aside to look at the screen himself. There was nothing he could do. The system was locked tight, encrypted with a cipher that had no key other than the one in my head. On every monitor in the control booth and on the giant screen looming over the destroyed gala, a single message pulsed in steady, mocking green text, "Access Control, Eleanor Vance." A piercing scream sliced through the chaotic din of the ballroom. It came from Tiffany. On the colossal screen, the financial records had been replaced by a slideshow of her private direct messages and photos backed up from Adrian's cloud. The texts were damning, revealing her mocking Adrian's age and detailing her plan to divorce him as soon as his stock options vested so she could take half the fortune. Humiliated and exposed as a gold digger rather than a muse, she shrieked and tried to cover her face with her clutch, making a desperate dash for the side exit. But there was no escape. The mob of reporters and photographers, smelling blood in the water, abandoned the stage and swarmed her, their flashbulbs exploding like strobe lights, trapping her in a cage of blinding white light. Adrian, seeing his mistress cornered and his life disintegrating, turned his feral gaze back to me. His eyes were bloodshot, bulging with a murderous rage. He roared an incoherent curse and lunged across the stage, his hands curled into fists, intent on physically silencing the woman he could not silence digitally. I did not flinch. I did not move. "Get her!" he screamed at the security team. "Arrest her." But the Blackguard agents did not move to help him. In fact, the lead agent, who had likely received a priority order from Marcus or simply realized that aiding a man currently broadcasting his own felonies was a bad career move, stepped directly into Adrian's path. He was a wall of muscle. Adrian slammed into the guard's chest and bounced back, stumbling. The guard did not strike him. He simply stood there, an impassive barrier between the monster and me. I stood up slowly from the piano bench, smoothing the front of my dress. I walked to the center of the stage and lifted the microphone from its stand. My hand was steady. The feedback whined for a split second before my voice boomed out, cutting through the murmurs and shouts of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, please look at your great CEO," I said, my voice calm, cold, and echoing with authority. "You believe he is a visionary, but the person who wrote every single algorithm, every line of code that built this company, is me. And the person who just destroyed it to protect the world from his greed is also me." The room fell into a stunned, breathless hush. 10 minutes ago, I continued, looking directly into the camera lens of the live stream, I sent a complete, unredacted copy of every document you see on this screen to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI Cybercrimes Division. There is no cover-up. There is no negotiation. It is over. As if on cue, a shrill ringing sound emanated from Adrian's pocket. It was his personal cell phone. In the silence of the room, the sound was deafening. He pulled it out with trembling hands. I saw the caller ID. It was his lead defense attorney. Adrian answered, listened for exactly 3 seconds, and then the color drained from his face entirely. The phone slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the hardwood stage. He collapsed. His knees hit the floor with a heavy thud. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, not of remorse, but of total despair. "You are insane," he wailed, his voice cracking. "You killed it. You killed our baby. You murdered Nexacorp." I looked down at him, the man I had once worshipped, now just a pathetic heap on the floor. I felt nothing, no love, No hate, just a hollow, resonant peace. "No, Adrian," I said, my voice magnified by the speakers, final as a judge's gavel. "You killed it the moment you touched my pride. Nexacorp is dead, but the truth is alive." The heavy double doors of the ballroom flew open with a violence that shook the crystal sconces on the walls. It was not a late arrival or a theatrical entrance for the gala. A dozen agents in navy blue windbreakers emblazoned with those 3 terrifying letters FBI poured into the room, their movements sharp, practiced, and lethal. The flashbulbs of the paparazzi shifted instantly from the stage to the entryway, capturing the demise of an era in real time. Adrian was hauled to his feet by 2 burly agents. The image of the golden boy of Silicon Valley being manhandled like a common thug was jarring. He did not go quietly. As the cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, echoing through the microphone that had fallen near his feet, his dignity evaporated completely. "It was not me," he shrieked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "It was her. It was Tiffany. She manipulated me. Talk to my vice president of finance. He set up the accounts. I did not know I am the victim here." He was flailing, spitting excuses, throwing anyone he could under the bus to save his own skin. The charismatic leader was gone, replaced by a sniveling coward terrified of the consequences of his own greed. Tiffany fared no better. An agent was reading her rights, informing her that she was being detained as a material witness and a beneficiary of laundered funds. The arrogant, statuesque model who had shoved me aside an hour ago was gone. In her place was a sobbing mess. Her mascara ran in black rivers down her cheeks, ruining the perfect contouring she had spent hours applying. She looked young, foolish, and entirely broken as they led her away. Her red dress now looking like a tawdry costume rather than a gown of victory. I stood alone at the front of the stage, watching the chaos unfold with a detached sense of satisfaction. I looked out at the audience. The same people who had sneered at me, who had whispered that I was unstable and frumpy, now looked at me as if I were a bomb that had not finished exploding. There was fear in their eyes, and beneath that, a begrudging, terrified respect. They realized that the quiet woman in the corner had not been weak. She had been waiting. They understood now that the power of Nexacorp never resided in Adrian's smile, but in my mind. Marcus emerged from the sea of stunned investors, flanked by 2 sharp-suited lawyers. He walked up to the edge of the stage and handed me a thick manila envelope. "It is done. Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying over the din. "The short positions were executed perfectly. We dumped the stock the moment the broadcast started. You have liquidated your entire stake before it hit zero. The trust fund for your son is fully secured and untouchable by the federal seizure order." I took the envelope, nodding my thanks. I had not just destroyed Adrian. I had harvested the ruins to ensure my son would never want for anything. I had outplayed them on the coding floor and the trading floor simultaneously. As I turned to leave, the agents marched Adrian past me. He looked haggard, his tie askew, his eyes wide with terror. He stopped struggling for a moment when he saw me. "Eleanor!" he cried out, lunging toward me before being yanked back by the chain. "Eleanor, please, you have to help me!" "Call them off. Think of Ben. Do not let his father go to prison. Think of our son." I stopped. I looked him up and down, seeing him clearly for the first time in years, not as a husband, not as a genius, but as a weak, greedy man. "I am thinking of Ben," I replied, my voice slicing through the air like a razor. "I am thinking of him every second, and that is exactly why I will not let a criminal raise him." I turned my back on him. I walked down the stairs from the stage, clutching the envelope to my chest. The crowd, a mix of billionaires and socialites, parted instantly. They stepped back, creating a wide path for me. dipping their heads in a mixture of terror and reverence. I walked through the center of the ballroom, head held high, not as a discarded wife, but as a queen who had just reclaimed her kingdom. I walked straight to the velvet corner where the nanny was standing, looking pale and shaken. Ben was just pulling his large, noise-canceling headphones down around his neck. He blinked, looking at the flashing lights of the police cars reflecting off the high ballroom ceiling. Confused by the sudden commotion, he looked at me, searching my face for cues on how to react. I did not cry. I did not look scared. I smiled, a genuine, soft smile that was just for him. He relaxed immediately. To him. If his mother was okay, the world was okay. I reached out and picked him up, holding him tight against my chest. "Let us go home, baby," I whispered into his hair, shielding him from the view of the agents swarming the stage. "We are all done here." We walked toward the grand exit. The air in the lobby was frantic, filled with shouting reporters and confused guests. But I moved with a slow, deliberate pace. Just before we pushed through the revolving doors, I paused. I turned back one last time to look at the ballroom. Through the open doors, I could see the giant screen. The technicians were finally managing to cut the hard line power, and the Nexacorp logo was flickering, distorting into jagged, broken shapes before fading into total darkness. It was a fitting end. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. There was one final step. The FBI had the evidence of the financial crimes, but the source code, the actual brain of the AI, was still on the servers. It was too dangerous to leave behind. It was too valuable. If it existed, Adrian might try to trade it for a lighter sentence, or the government might seize it to use for their own ends. I opened my private terminal app. A single red button pulsed on the screen. It was labeled simply Cleanse. I did not hesitate. I pressed it. Deep in the server farm in New Jersey, and in the backups in Ireland, a kill switch engaged. It was not a simple delete command, which could be recovered by forensic experts. It was a secure overwrite protocol. Every line of my code was being replaced with random, meaningless noise. Zeros and ones were scrambling into gibberish. By the time I put my phone back in my pocket, Nexacorp was nothing but empty office space and scrap metal. Adrian had nothing to sell. He had nothing to bargain with. He was going to prison with empty pockets and zero leverage. We stepped out onto Fifth Avenue. The New York winter air was biting, usually enough to make me shiver. But tonight I felt a roaring warmth in my chest. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sharp, cold oxygen. I had walked into that hotel as a ghost, a shadowed wife, a victim. I was walking out as Eleanor Vance. I had lost a husband who never deserved me, but I had found the woman I thought was dead, the genius, the artist, the mother. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. The driver, sent by Marcus, stepped out and opened the door. I ushered Ben inside, making sure he was warm. I paused for 1 second, my hand on the doorframe. I did not look back at the hotel. I did not look back at the flashing lights of the police cruisers. I looked down at my own hands. These hands. They had played concertos at Lincoln Center. They had typed the code that changed the world. And tonight, they had toppled an empire. I knew that tomorrow would be a blank sheet of music, and for the first time in a decade, I was the one holding the pen. I slid into the leather seat, and the door closed with a solid, comforting thud. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and let us know your location and share your thoughts on this revenge. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get recommended to even more people.